My guest today is Sierra Morris. Sierra is a mental performance coach and marathon runner dedicated to breaking her own mental and physical barriers and supporting others to be the best they can be. With a master's degree in sport and performance psychology and training as a master resilience trainer, Sierra has worked with athletes and soldiers in the U.S. Army to build mental skills and techniques crucial to optimal performance. She also holds a corporate wellness specialist certification and currently works as a wellness and work-life coordinator for the faculty and staff at the University of Alabama. Over the last year alone, Sierra ran 12 road and trail races of various distances. And with the help of her mental skills training, she cut down her marathon PR from 3:20 to 3:06. Today, we're going to talk about Sierra's top mental performance techniques for athletes. This was a great conversation and one you're not going to want to miss. Sierra Morris, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here. I've been following your running journey for a little over a year now. And I'm always so impressed by the things you've accomplished. You've ran a 3:06 marathon. You completed your first couple trail races and won them. And one of the things that I love about your content is that you focus on the mental training aspect for athletes, which I don't think a lot of people talk about. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about how you got into running and specifically the mental training side of sports performance?
Absolutely. So I started seriously running in 2022. I had done 5Ks off and on, like the turkey trot when I was younger, back in my hometown, but never really enjoyed it. But I had also played sports. So I played soccer and basketball, and then moved to women's rugby when I was in college and played semi-professionally after I had graduated just for a little bit. And so running was always a part of those sports. But again, I never wanted to go out and run more than just a couple miles here and there for fitness. COVID, I think, really helped just with gyms closing. That's like the classic story with a lot of people now, which is great.
Yeah.
Something positive that came out of those years of experience. So with gyms closed, it was kind of my only option to continue on my fitness regimen. And so I just kind of sucked it up and went for my runs, and then eventually loved it and signed up for a half marathon, mostly to see how it would be. I love just challenging myself and seeing what I'm capable of mentally and physically. And so that really started it. It was a tough race. I didn't really know how to train. I followed my training plan as well as I could, but it wasn't 100%. And so I finished that first half marathon thinking, I wonder how it would be if I ran a full marathon, or how it would be if I really trained and did everything that I could to be the best runner. And that kind of just started my love for running. The last year, especially, connecting with people. I just moved to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or I didn't know anybody. I had moved for a job. And so I really connected with the people in the running community here. And that is what really helped me in the past year alone run a major PR in the marathon, go to trail races and feel strong and win and finish on the podium just behind, second or third place overall. So that's kind of my running journey. The mental skills aspect is something that I've always been interested in because of my experiences in team sports, knowing that I could play better or perform better, not really necessarily knowing why, but looking back, reflecting on my performances and saying, that was not my best. The physicality is there, my skill is there, but what else is missing? Mm-hmm. And so when I went to study at undergrad, I majored in psychology, did an internship at West Point in their Center for Enhanced Performance, working with athletes and the cadets there. And that was my first taste of sports psychology and mental skills training. And I knew that I wanted to go into that field, not just, of course, for myself and my own performance and whatever I'm doing, but also to help others, because that is definitely what was lacking when I was growing up playing sports. So got my master's in sport and performance psychology, worked with soldiers in the US Army on resilience training and performance enhancement skills, the mental skills aspect of that, and working with athletes and corporate wellness as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I love that side of training. I didn't realize you were at West Point for a period of time. Did you encounter Dr. Nate Zinsser at all while you were
Yes.
there?
Yeah, I worked with him. He was like one of my mentors
That's
at that
awesome.
internship. Yeah.
I've read so many books on sports performance, and his is by far my favorite. So that's very cool. You got a chance to work with him.
Yeah.
Also, I'm not surprised to hear that you have an athletic background, but I am surprised to hear that you hadn't been running longer than a couple years. I mean, you are pushing up against a sub 3 hour marathon. I think you'll get it probably the next time you go out. That's truly impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, it is crazy even to just look back on this last year. This weekend, actually today, last year, I was running a marathon trying to qualify for Boston. Probably the worst strategic marathon that I've ran. And I ran at 3:20, would have qualified me for Boston as long as the cutoff time was less than 10 minutes. And so I qualified for Boston, and now I am training to run, fingers crossed, the sub 3 in Boston. So it's
I think you're going to do it.
amazing to see like what has changed in the last year.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, just qualifying is such a crazy feat nowadays. I mean, the qualifying times just get more and more challenging. So awesome that you did that. Well, I think this is a great jumping off point into our conversation of the day, which you're going to tell us your top 5 mental training strategies for athletes. But yeah, let's get started. Like, what's the number one technique you want to start off with?
Okay, so before I get into the specific mental skills, I just want to say that everybody is an individual. So just because these are my top 5 doesn't mean that these are the only top 5 that are going to help or the only skills that you should focus on as an athlete. You have to build first self-awareness of your thought patterns, what your struggles really are, especially when you're training for a race or a competition. And that's really going to help you figure out what's going to work best for you and what you should practice. But I tried to keep it as general as possible, and I'll get into specifics as well. But these are not the only skills that you should be focusing on in terms of mental training. But the first one is I chose goal setting, and this is in no particular order either. But goal setting is kind of like the ugly stepsister of like mental skills. It's not flashy. It's not super motivational. It's kind of like, yeah, I'll set a goal and you set it and you forget about it, or you lay out your behaviors that you need to exhibit to achieve that goal. But it's not flashy. It's not exciting. It is extremely important though. And that's what training is. If you've ever trained for anything, you know that it's not always exciting and it can be really monotonous. It can be really the struggle every single day to do what you need to do to train is exactly what goal setting is. So first, you have to set a goal. You have to be really clear about what that goal is, why you set that goal, not just because you want to win or run a specific time or finish in a specific hour, but really what is the root why? That's what's going to drive your behaviors and your motivation to do what you need to do on those days where you really don't feel like doing it. Big goal is going to be the most important because that's what's going to tell you exactly what you need to do every single day. But you also have to remember those small goals as well. So especially if you have a really big training block, it can be really overwhelming or intimidating to look 4 months down the line and say, this is my goal. But there's 4 months worth of training and a lot of hours and effort that you need to put into it. So being able to break up that goal into small milestones and then celebrating those goals once you reach them are going to help fuel that motivation and continue your efforts and energy along the way. Remembering that big goal in the back of your mind, but focusing on those small goals is going to help you like month 2 of the training and you still have 2 months left. So that would be number 1.
I think one of the points you just mentioned, celebrating your wins along the way, it is so easy to lose track of that because you're just going and going and going and you're training towards that goal at the end. But really celebrating those wins and taking the time to reflect on your accomplishments can produce more confidence in what you're doing. And when you just keep going without acknowledging your wins along the way, it's easy to lose sight of how far you've come.
Definitely. Yeah. So we can also fall into the trap of what you're saying of we're so focused on the things that we're trying to do ahead that we forget all the effort and all of the things that we've done that have gotten to this moment.
Right.
And being able to celebrate, yeah, like look at where I was a month ago and now look at where I'm at. Yes, there's still effort to be put in, but celebrating those things is definitely going to help your confidence.
Absolutely. And I think with endurance training in particular, there's this tendency once you've done one thing, right? You're like, okay, I checked that box. Now it's time to either do it faster or do a longer challenge, right? And that's how like a lot of us start with that 5K turkey trot and end up doing marathons because there's a bit of an addictive component to it and you just want to keep pushing yourself. And if you have that personality type, you really have to be conscious of taking a moment to reflect before just moving on to the next box to check.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So establishing clear goals, understanding your big why, breaking those goals up into smaller, achievable goals throughout a training plan. What's kind of the next mental strategy that you would recommend?
The next two are kind of together. The general category that these two skills would fall into is energy management. So the first skill within that energy management mental skill foundation is going to be deliberate breathing. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I am a huge advocate for meditation, deliberate breathing, using your breath for you. We breathe, of course. If we didn't, we wouldn't feel alive, but don't always use our breath to our advantage when we can. So when I say energy management as a general term, I mean being aware of what it feels like at different energy levels for you, physically, mentally, emotionally. What does it look like and what does it feel like? And then what would it look like at your best performance? So if you think back to one of your top performances in a race or a competition, what was your energy like when you first started, before you even started, during that competition, and then after? And that will help you cue into exactly what you want to feel when you're at that start line or when you're training, so that you can be as effective and efficient as possible with your energy. So deliberate breathing is going to really help with that aspect. If you realize that, you know, I'm towing the line at the start of my marathon and my energy is a little too high. I'm getting jittery. I feel a little frantic. My heart rate is pumping way too fast. And that's probably going to result in me going out too fast. It's going to take a little longer for me to settle into that pace that I need to go. And I don't want to waste any energy because any kind of endurance competition or race, you want to be as efficient as possible with your energy because you're going to need it. So being able to take a couple deep breaths, calming yourself down, deep belly breathing is something that you can do in a second or 2 seconds. You can do it anywhere. That's going to really help you get to where you want in terms of your energy, especially in those moments when you need to calm down. You can also pair breathing techniques to certain skills, so other mental skills. So if I notice that my energy is just way too high for where I need to be in my elite performance, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths and then also pair it maybe with a physical cue or a mental cue or something else that I can cue my brain into refocus rather than focusing on how like nervous I am or how much energy I feel like I have that I know isn't going to help me perform the best. So that is going to be skill number 2.
What would be a good example of a physical cue that you could associate with that?
I like to like clap my hands. Some people like to like slap their leg lightly just to kind of cue, like snap yourself out of whatever is going on in your mind. Especially if you're ruminating on a couple different thoughts that aren't going to be as productive, that kind of snaps you out of, hey, like what's important now? let me take a couple deep breaths, let me clap my hands, and let me refocus on exactly what I need to do.
Yeah, one of the things I've taken away from your content is you're not waiting until the day you get to the start line to practice this. You're practicing these cues and mental strategies and deliberate breathing in your training runs.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to take a couple deep breaths before I start my training run, kind of give myself the time and space to let go of anything else that's happened before that run throughout the day. Cue myself into, okay, we're training right now. This is what I need to get out of this run for the next, 30 minutes, hour, whatever the case is. And then that allows me to focus and cue my brain into, okay, we're in training mode. We're going to be ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's an important strategy. And if you practice it, it won't feel abnormal on race day. It'll just feel like this is what we do. So what's the second part of energy management?
Okay, so the second energy management skill and the third of the top 5 mental skills is going to be mindfulness. So goes along with deliberate breathing, goes along with meditation, but this one is going to be slightly different because it's all about accepting where you're at, creating some like non-judgmental thinking around where you are in your training, how you're feeling, what thoughts you're having. I think we can all think back to maybe a training run that didn't go so great. We were in the middle of it and we were hating it. And you're just constantly thinking about, okay, when is this going to be over? I don't feel good. This is not how it was supposed to go. Even a race, like I said before, like the race that I ran last year at this time, I was definitely in that headspace. Our instinct is to either shove those feelings aside and kind of ignore them we try to counter them with more positive thoughts. Oftentimes in that moment, we're not going to be positive. We will not see the positive side because we're so far down in that moment. We're going to ignore them or try to ignore them. But the more we try to ignore them, the more we say, I don't want to think that. I can't feel that way. The more it highlights those thoughts and those feelings because you're constantly thinking of it. So you probably have heard, don't think of a pink elephant. You're probably thinking of a pink elephant right now.
Right, yep.
So you have to replace those thoughts and feelings with something else, which we'll talk about in just a second. Or practice mindfulness and say, you know what, this is where we're at right now. I am in this moment. I do not feel good. It is what it is, and I'm not going to ruminate on it. I'm going to keep going. As long as it's safe to do so and you're not risking injury, I'm just going to push through. That is going to help you regulate that energy that you may be feeling. And it's also going to help you get out of your head a little bit more. So the second way you can practice mindfulness rather than just, accepting the moment is focusing on things outside of your thoughts or how you're feeling physically. So you can pick out one thing that you might see on your run or one thing that you feel in terms of external. So like maybe you feel the wind on your face or you feel your shirt like on your arms or the sun on your face, something to get you out of that moment of this is really hard and I hate every second of it. So you can play with your senses, see what kind of helps you get out of those moments and then refocus. Because oftentimes if we have a skill or a practice that allows us for even just a second or two, a couple steps in a run, that's enough to get us out of those like really, really tough moments.
And that goes back to just regular psychology advice, right? Like I know that for like anxiety, they talk about kind of noticing textures of something around you, just like you're saying with like the shirt on the skin, anything to just ground yourself in the moment. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it's easy to implement. Yeah, you just have to remember to do it, which is something I struggle with. It's like, I know the strategies, but in the moment, I can't always recall them, which I guess goes back to like the whole practicing thing. The more you practice it, the more it'll become second nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just like physical training. The more you practice, the easier it'll be when you need it in the moment to have it readily available. And I will say it is a lot easier to practice if you're able to reflect on those moments. So, yeah, maybe you have a really, really tough run, and in the moment, you don't remember any mental skills. You're just trying to survive the run. But then after the run, you can look back and say, yeah, I didn't do so well, or I didn't have a great run. This is what I maybe could have done in the moment, practicing my mental skills, doing some deliberate breathing, picking out one thing that I saw or felt. And that way, next time you remember in those moments. So the more you do that, the easier it'll be in your mind in the moment when you need it the most.
Okay, so goal setting, energy management. What else?
Okay, so the next one is called, I like to call it real-time resilience. It's a strategy that helps with building confidence in the moment. And it allows you to replace those more unproductive thoughts with positive or productive thoughts. So this skill is really useful right before some kind of competition, right before some training run, where all of those doubts come into mind. Like, did I train enough? Did I eat enough? Am I prepared? What about my gear? Is everything set? Like, I think we probably all can remember or reflect on a couple of those things that we've thought. So we have to have strategies in place to help us in those moments, make sure that we're reminding ourselves of all the moments that we've trained, the hours, the months, the whatever the case is, that's going to help us get there. Because oftentimes it's not enough to say, no, you're ready, or hear it from somebody else. We have to have other strategies in place. So for real-time resilience, when those thoughts are starting to come right before a competition, we want to use 3 separate strategies within real-time resilience to counter those unproductive thoughts, turn them into more productive thoughts. So we can use optimism. So that positivity, for example, if I am ready to run a big marathon, I am right at the start line, I'm looking around, everybody else is, looks really ready to, it's intimidating. I could be thinking to myself, did I train enough? Is this goal too big? I don't know if I can do this. That's not going to help me perform my best, at least at the start. So using optimism or positivity, I can say something like, you're strong. This is going to be great either way. We're just going to embrace the moment, being positive in that way. That might help me in the moment bounce back from those counterproductive thoughts. That's not my preferred way, but again, because everybody is so individualized, that could work for somebody.
Right. If it works, why not use it? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Another way that we can counter those unproductive thoughts is using data or evidence. So this is one of my favorite things to how to counter unproductive thoughts. So in that moment of saying, did I train enough? Is this goal too big? I don't know if I can do it. I would say, look back at all of those hours that you train, all the training runs, you were able to adhere to your training plan specific to your goal. You hit all of your paces. The data is there. The evidence is there that you are going to reach this goal. So that is what was going to help me feel ready, relax, feel confident in my abilities, and do what I need to do to reach that goal.
Yeah.
And then the third way that you can counter these unproductive thoughts is putting it in perspective. So basically saying, what's the worst that could happen? And just go for it. So yes, you may not feel ready, but what's the worst that could happen? You don't reach your time. It's just the time that you set anyway. Now, get it the next time. That kind of release of pressure could help somebody say I'm just going to go for it and we'll see what happens. But no pressure. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to, lose my house and my family, my job just for not reaching my goal.
That's such a good reminder for us amateur athletes. No one's paying most of us to do this, right?
Exactly.
We're doing this because it's fun for us. It's a goal that we want to achieve. But at the end of the day, if you had a 3:06 marathon time versus a 3:01, no one else other than you is really like, it sounds kind of harsh, but no one else is going to care. It's your
Right.
goal. And sometimes that can relieve a little pressure to do what you're saying is recognize that, there's not that much writing on this at the end of the day. It's for fun. It's for your own personal development. And sometimes it's important to remind yourself of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
The second piece you mentioned about data evidence, this actually, and maybe you encountered this with your work with the military. In the military, there's something called a brag sheet that everyone is taught to walk around with. And it is exactly what you're saying. It's the consistent evidence, and you're adding to your brag sheet over time of the quality things you did. And then in the military, we're talking about coming on like your performance review, and you have this whole list of wins that you have throughout the year that you can reflect back on. And I think as athletes, it's a good idea to have our own form of a brag sheet, whether you actually write it down or you keep the checklist in your head that you can reflect on and say, like, exactly what you said. Here's the data, here's the evidence. I did put in the work, and using that to fuel your performance.
Definitely. I love that. I think everybody should have something like that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to even write it down and keep it for yourself because I think a lot of people don't like to, brag or share their accomplishments, but you can do a brag sheet of all of the like accomplishments and achievements that you've done, time, pace, distance, like that kind of data. And then you can also do one on effort, your wins that, yes, I wasn't even able to run a mile, at this time last year. And now I can run half a mile or half marathon or something like that. Something where it's less about the actual pace and miles and distance. It's more about the effort that you put into. So I think that's a great idea. I love that.
Yeah, and like you've been saying throughout, it's individualized, right? And it's if you couldn't run a mile and now you can, that's a huge accomplishment. What else?
Okay, so the fifth mental skill that I absolutely love to use, it's super simple. And I've talked about this a little bit throughout my like posts on Instagram, mind games or mental games. So this skill is going to be helpful during a training run, during a long endurance competition, just to help you get out of the zone for a second and then get right back into it. So if we're thinking about running a long 2 or 3 hour training run or a 3 5 hour block of competition, that's a long time to be focused on one thing.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing a triathlon, like that's a long time to be focused on swimming, biking, or running. And our attention span is just about 50 minutes. So we need to have some kind of like, all right, let me get a little bit of a break and then come back to it. Mind games are going to be short, really easy things that you can put your mind on something else, focus on something completely different from what you're doing. It's not going to take a lot of effort. It's not going to take a lot of brain power, or you can still run, you can still bike or do whatever you're doing in the moment, but still not really be focusing on what you're doing. So, for example, I like to list out all the places that I like to travel in the world. So I'm not thinking about running. I'm thinking about, I'd love to go to Tokyo and I'd love to go to Sydney and I'd love to travel to some of the national parks out west in the US. Just like listing out what I'd like to do. It takes 30 seconds and then I'm like, okay, let me get back into it. Maybe I'll take a deliberate breath, get back into my run, but I'm kind of refreshed. I have maybe some more energy. And that helps just take a break,
Yeah.
take your mind off of what you're doing, especially on those really, really long efforts.
I didn't know this was a thing until I saw it in your content because I was doing this. I'm a fan of like The Simpsons and Family Guy and like cheesy cartoon shows that have been on for 20 years that have a million characters. And while I'm running, I would often try to list as many characters in my head as I could, which is
Yeah.
kind of the same principle as what you're talking about, with like travel locations or whatever makes sense for you. And maybe it would last me a couple minutes before I'd refocus on the run. But you're right, it offers a little bit of a reprieve from this really long term thing you're doing. And I think I didn't realize that was an actual technique, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I love that. And that is to your point. I think a lot of people do use mental skills on their own, but they just don't realize it. And so you already have the practice. If you're able to identify what you're doing that does work in terms of a mental skill and then intentionally practice it, you're going to be even stronger mentally.
Yeah, that's good to know. What are some other mental games you like to use?
So if it's the fall, I like to see how many like leaves I can step on and I'll count those. I like to bake, so I will list I have like a my favorite cookie recipe, so I'll list out like all the ingredients I've made so many times that I know it by heart, all the ingredients, all the measurements that I would need and like how I would make it. If you've ever played like categories, like when you're, waiting for something with your friends, just anything, list out all of your favorite restaurants or all of the like car manufacturers. So the biggest thing that matters in mental games is that it's easy. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of effort. So I don't want people to be thinking about these major, life concepts or, where do I want to be in 5 years? That takes a lot more mental energy and a lot more time than you want while you're running or while you're training for 3-4 hours. So
Yeah, definitely. One of the ones I've seen you do is like getting to like a checkpoint on the run, like getting to that stop sign or getting to that next building or whatever. Is there like any strategy with like a distance to choose in that, or you just pick whatever you see and just go from there?
So that would be a good example of a physical cue or a visual cue. So I love that concept because especially when I'm like, how much longer do I have in this effort? I really want to look at my watch. I'll tell myself, don't look at your watch until you get to the next street or the next turn. And then by the time I get to the next turn, I might not even need to look at my watch because I'm kind of already over that moment of like, when is this run going to be over?
Yeah.
So it just, again, it allows you to focus on something other than how you're feeling if you're struggling in the moment. In terms of distance, I would suggest pick something where you think is going to be slightly challenging, not super easy, not something that's going to be 5 steps in front of you, but something where you can still see it and you can kind of focus on it. But you're not thinking, when am I going to get to this moment? Because that's going to defeat the purpose.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't give you enough time to kind of push through that moment either.
Yeah. What is your thought on like practicing this stuff outside of a training environment?
I think you can practice any skill at any time. So I like to say that everything is a performance, whether, if you have a full-time job and you're going to work every day, you have to perform at your best. If you present or you're giving like in a big meeting, you're getting up in front of people, that's a performance you want to be your best at. When you're going out with friends or you're home with your family, you want to be at your best. So I think you can practice any of these skills at any time. They're going to look different, of course, but for example, deliberate breathing, you can breathe deliberately at any time. If you have an interaction with one of your friends or a family member and you realize that, you're maybe a little more heated than you would like to be, or you're really lethargic and you want to be more energized, taking a deliberate breath can help you reset. And that's really great practice for training too.
Do you practice the mindfulness aspect outside of training, like meditation or anything like that?
Yes, definitely. So I love to practice meditation. Anytime I really need, I feel like I need a reset or I'm moving from one task to another, especially at work, it allows me to have that moment, even just 2 or 3 minutes, to just refocus on something else and let go of the thing that I was just working on. When I do presentations at work, I am absolutely practicing mindfulness and meditating beforehand and kind of setting my intentions for that performance. So there's so many things that you can do.
There's a video going around of Michael Phelps, and one of the strategy he used in his training for the Olympics was every time he'd walk through a doorway, he'd say, I swim X stroke at X pace, and super hyper specific. And I really liked it, but I wonder if that's too much, I get if you're a professional athlete, so you're hyper focusing, because if you think of how many times you're walking through a doorway throughout the day, like Do you think there's like a line between doing too much like mental preparation, or do you think something like that actually could be effective for amateur athletes too?
So I would first say do what you want to, or try what you want to do. I think there is definitely a line and a balance that needs to be struck with amateur athletes, because we see professional athletes and sometimes we forget that this is what they do. Yes, it's incredibly impressive and it's a lot of time and effort, but they may not have jobs and daily things like grocery shopping that they have to do too.
Right. Yeah.
So just keep that in mind as you're practicing certain things. It could absolutely work for somebody. Every time you walk through a doorway, you're going to tell yourself, I am going to run a sub 3 hour marathon. Yeah, that would be great. Personally, for me, if I try to set that goal for myself, I know I'm going to forget. Every time I walk through a doorway, there's no way I'm going to remember that.
Yeah.
So finding something else that might work, like every time I fill up my water bottle, it's going to be maybe 4 times a day. I'll tell myself that. That's going to be a little more manageable and it's going to help me remember to actually do it. Because the more you practice something, the easier it's going to be, but you have to take the time to practice it. I do think there is too much of a good thing as well. And that's sometimes when a lot of the pressure comes. If you're constantly thinking about something, you never get a break. You could burn out even before physically burning out. That mental burnout is definitely real. It puts that pressure on of like, I said this to myself over 100 times in the last month. I feel like I should be able to do it, but what if I don't? Because I've been telling myself this so much that it becomes part of your identity. It becomes part of who you are. And if you don't do it, like we were saying earlier, it's not a big deal, but you've made it such a big deal that it feels like you are not exactly who you say you are, or you don't really understand who you are because you weren't able to reach that goal. So just being aware of, take it as you enjoy the practice. Keeping that passion is extremely important.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I have fallen into this trap. That's how I know it, because I've overthought about something and I've ended up, for lack of a better term, psyching myself out. So, and maybe this is a good place we can kind of wrap up because I want to be respectful of your time. What are your thoughts on overcoming the yips? The athlete that gets in their own head and can't get out.
I have so many thoughts. I think a break would probably be the best for that, because anytime that I've seen or worked with athletes who have tried these mental skills and just cannot get over or push through these things, there's a lot of thoughts going on and a lot of pressure being put on them, whether it's from themselves or others, that they're invested too much in it. And when they're not making money and they're not, their livelihood isn't relying on that, it isn't worth it. Being able to like take a break, even backing off just a little bit, resetting, reminding yourself why you even started to train or why you picked this sport up, that's going to help reset everything and get back into it in a healthier and more productive way.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. And if you're someone who's ever experienced that, time off can help a little bit, or time away, even if it's not time off, just distracting yourself with some other sort of hobby unrelated to that, like just to give yourself a little bit of a break, I think can help. Sierra, this has been a great conversation. You have provided so much value. I think we could go on for hours because I love this topic, but let's cut it here and let's just tell the audience where they can find out more about your journey and follow what you're doing.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Shattered Runner. Instagram is really my only social media platform. And then, so I love to share my training. So I'm training for Boston right now, so you can follow along with that. And then I'll also try to share some mental skills and training techniques as well. And then I do create meditations for runners specifically. So Shattered Runner meditations, Apple and Spotify. They're meant to be short, meditations to help you pre-run, post-run. I have a couple that you can use during runs, but those are going to be really helpful, 5-10 minutes to practice these mental skills that we've been talking about.
Awesome. Sierra, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk. And anybody, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk more about any of the skills.
My guest today was Sierra Morris, mental performance specialist and marathon runner. You can follow Sierra at Shattered Runner on Instagram. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help the channel. If you're looking for a training program that incorporates mental performance as well as strength and endurance work, make sure to check out my coaching page in the description. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist with a background in endurance sports, and I'd love to help you with your fitness goals. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.